Our story immediately begins with a creepy shot of a somewhat desolated tree. Really, doesn't horror have enough desolated trees already? Anyways, there's a house next to said tree, and inside that home is some kid watching a rubber room full of rats. You know what drives me crazy? Well, this kid is pretty good at playing the piano. I mean, for her age, she could probably become the next Beethoven, or the next fat Redditor with that kind of keyboard smashing. Anyway, it seems that she's hungry now, so she's gonna make herself a treat. A kid and a blender, really? Something about this doesn't seem right. She talks to someone named Francis.
A little help here, Francis.
But we don't really know who. Anyways, she pours some honey and a bunch of other stuff in the blender. She and her friend named Francis don't think it's enough, so she reaches for a jar of peaches. Of course, being the kid, she's a klutz by default, so she smashes the jar by accident. Then she blames Francis, which is apparently the turtle doll sitting next to her. Well, time to get the scraps, at least. The little girl says Francis won't get smoothies. Then the blender jams. What to do? What to do? I've got a great idea. How about we stick our hand into a live blender? Why, isn't that a fantastic idea? It's really too bad she unjams the blender, and she just barely saves her hand because of a loud noise heard from a distance. Without cleaning up the glass shards, she investigates the loud noise, and she scolds it. Wow, tough girl. Anyways, back to business. Bottoms up, and the smoothie is great. What a happy time, up until she idiotically steps on one of the glass shards. Yeah, that's what you get when you don't clean up your messes. Well, she hops upstairs while crying, then patches herself up. It seems like this girl is living alone, and even sets up some lousy dinner alone. I tell you, Americans can't cook. Anyways, she has some girl dinner with Francis. Then she has a bit of a schizo moment in her bathroom. That's when the spooky lights flicker on and off. Are you scared yet? Enough of that. It's time for bed. But before we sleep, this little girl reads herself a bedtime story about unicorns. Totally not predictable. Anyways, the story is about a unicorn freak who has 2 horns instead of 1. She makes some friends. She wants to become normal, but she's actually special. Wow. And then everyone stood up and clapped. Such a riveting tale, even the girl doesn't like it. At the end of it, the little girl wants her mommy and daddy.
I want Mom and Daddy.
The next day, the little girl plays hide and seek with Francis. And geez, the house really is abandoned apart from her. She counts down while she roams around the house. Then she ends up in a tree fort, calling for Francis to come and find her.
I'm here, come find me!
It seems that all these little clues littered around the house points out that there was an unseen invasion, and what looks to be this little girl's parents went to fight with whatever opposing force is out there. Suddenly, memory lane is interrupted when another loud noise bangs. The little girl tries to be quiet, but there is definitely something out there. It doesn't sound paranormal, but it sounds alien. Eventually, the noises stop, and the little girl comes out to investigate. She then checks the window and tells Francis that it came back. Whatever it is, it lives in the woods near her house. She tells Francis whenever it comes, everyone should stay quiet and calm, otherwise bad things happen. So it's time for more playtime for the little girl. She goes outside with Francis to touch some grass, but here comes Mr. Hopper. The little girl is enthralled that this rabbit is here, so she goes to the kitchen to fetch a jar of sauce. And this time, she or Francis didn't break it. She did spill it on herself though. This makes her say, shoot, but hey, no adults, right? So she starts swearing like a sailor. She pours some sauce into a bowl, then serves it to Mr. Hopper, but he hops back into the bushes. The little girl tries to stop him, but that thing went into the cursed bushes she was talking about. So that's no bueno. Night comes, and she's all alone again. Of course, the spooky lights flicker on and off this time. And boo. A jump scare of a boy rattling his head around like a bobblehead. Of course, That was just all in my head. A dream, if you will. She wakes up, and it is back. She locks herself in her room, and then she accidentally steps on a pumpkin. Well, it's a rotten pumpkin, so she throws it out, then immediately apologizes to someone or something in the room. Whoever this is, she calls it Paul and good gravy that looks like a lifeless hand. Or so you would think, as it moves a little and the little girl tries to get some shut-eye next to the corpse. All right, it's time for another crazy adventure since it's a new day. And it's the little girl trying to get a knife off the ceiling. Then she watches some TV about some creatures meant to be put in a jar, then cycles through the news about some quarantine. Keep in mind, this movie is in 2017, so that's cool to know they predicted the bat soup epidemic. The night comes, and it's another playdate with the little girl. It looks like she's setting up for a literal dark tea party, and then talks to Francis again. I swear, either this girl is projecting onto Francis for company, or Francis has a lot of that turtle riz. Whatever it is, it's a cute little tea party, up until the window slams a bit. She thinks Francis slammed the windows. Then while she closes it back, the freaking chair moves on its own. Guess what else comes up? A blood trail. She follows the blood trail back to the underside of the table, and it's nothing. Nah, just kidding. It's a bait and switch. So here's a gruesome scene of Mr. Hopper. The little girl finally lets it out on Paul, but as she states, he's dead. But she blames her for why their parents are gone. And that's when we learn her name, Stephanie. Suddenly, the body she was taking her anger out on rose up. It looks and sounds like it's rotting and festering. Stephanie's shock and scream was so insane, it took out the power to her house. So for the entire night, Stephanie is freaking out underneath the sheets. The next day, she horridly eats some jam for breakfast with Francis. Then she naps with him on the couch roughly the entire day thanks to her previous insomnia. When she wakes up, it's already nighttime. She tries to go for the lights, but the power is really out, so there's only one thing left to do. Time to go down into the creepy basement and try to restart the power. She leaves Francis to be the lookout. Then she ventures into the cellar alone. You can barely see a thing in this crummy place, but luckily, some light emanates from the windows. Stephanie paces herself carefully around the basement. Then some rattling noises are heard. Suddenly, something thrashes around the washing machine. So she gets a box and zooms out of there at the first sight of trouble. It seems that the box was filled with candles, so I guess this could work to Stephanie's favor. Her blanket fort and a bunch of other locations are now filled with lit candles, and this kind looks like a fire hazard. We're then taken to Stephanie, who's sleeping in one of the darker blanket forts while a thunderstorm riles up outside. She wakes up, and it sounds like there's something out there other than a thunderstorm. Of course, like any other child or moronic horror protagonist, instead of hiding from whatever's out there, she investigates. The door is left wide open, and the rain is pouring a bit inside. Not to mention, there's something behind her. All the while something moves in front of her. That's when a shadowy figure makes itself known in the doorway and Stephanie books it. She hides upstairs, careful not to make a noise, but she could hear the footsteps get louder and louder. The door opens, and what do you know? It's Stephanie's dad. Time for a very reassuring hug, and it looks like even her mom is there with her. Looks like Francis just lost his job, or did he? Well, they sleep for the night, and I could safely say that this is the most peaceful sleep Stephanie had in ages. The next morning, you'd think Stephanie would witness a PG-13 scene, but nope. It looks like her mom puts on her clothes, and she has some weird holes in her stomach. Stephanie pretends to be asleep, and the mom looks pretty sus, not gonna lie. Sometime later, Stephanie does wake up and sees her dad working on some wood. Then she notices that the body of Paul in his room is gone. That's when she goes out into the front yard to investigate, and she goes further and further into the woods. At the end of the line of trees, Stephanie notices that there's a grave and it must be Paul's.
Paul?
Weirdly enough, She tries to dig his grave, but then she cries and realizes Paul is truly gone. Steph then hears her name being shouted from a distance, so she comes home, only for her mother to try and heavily reprimand her of the dangers lurking out there. The father doesn't want to be rough on her, so he stops her from doing so. Stephanie pleads to her parents that she wants Paul to come home, but there's something pretty sus about the parents. Later that night, the mom is shown to be spying on her while she sleeps. Then just like that, it's morning. It's time to have some breakfast. While it is already peachy in this household, Steph wonders why Dad is as busy as a beaver. Well, you know, boys will be boys. Now time for the hard-hitting questions. Why did they leave little old Steph alone? According to her mother, they thought that whatever was other there, it already got Stephanie and devoured her like a 3-piece KFC combo meal. Well, Steph is not a combo meal, but she does tell her mom that the monster still comes sniffing around from time to time from the woods. She also tells her that if the monster comes back, she just hides. Her mother commends her bravery, but in reality, she's just really frightened. So it's the middle of the day. Steph comes out to what her father is building around the yard, and apparently, it's a fence to keep whatever's out there. Steph's a bit dubious whether this will keep the monster from going in and or out of the house, but she tells her dad that he's doing a fine job so far. His dad asks about Mr. Hopper, but the mom calls him first, so she doesn't get to spill the beans on Mr. Hopper's rotten cadaver. Night falls, and Steph creeps around her parents' room to find that she's Skyping with someone from the military, asking about the SITREP. You'll notice that this is really a 2017 movie, because who uses Skype nowadays? We've all moved to Discord, baby. The call finally mentions the mother's name, Jane. Then whoever is on the other line is kind of freaked out on how she's doing. That's when Stephanie books out of there, and Jane talks more about the isolation protocol and whatnot. You know, military stuff. So Steph goes to her dad to have some hot popcorn, and finally, some quality time. The dad also says the fence could be done about the next day. So worries aside, the family finally spends some quality time together watching a movie and messing about on the couch. Later into the night, the father is seen doing Steph's hair, but some light crying can be heard from somewhere, so the dad investigates. We're taken into a ravaged room, and we finally see Paul's disfigured corpse. This is where Jane's waterworks start coming in as she mourns for her son. Then the dad comforts her. Steph is seen spying on them too. The following day, the mood is pretty much the polar opposite of last night's mood. Then Steph finally breaks in the question of how did Paul make it back. Finally, the father answers her question that the monster did bring Paul's body back. No one really knows why the monster does whatever, but one thing is for sure, as backed up by the father here. The monster is after Stephanie, and it will follow them, even if they move out. Never thought the monster would be from Tarlac. Like all kids, Stephanie was told there's no such thing as monsters. But it's pretty obvious that they were wrong now. Steph finds her dad working on the fence once more, so now she could sneak into the office, and there she reads that there is an infestation of unnamed monsters that are ravaging people from all across the globe. She then comes to a book about some research, but before we could find out what they're really up against, the mother is coming. Stephanie hides underneath the desk, but then her mother rages and slams everything on the desk sideways. I mean, they took her son, so it's no wonder why she would be so frustrated. So afterwards, Steph takes a bath. Then her dad comes in to talk to her. Apparently, he says that Jane is sorry for losing her temper, and she's just a bit on the edge since this whole infestation has started. Apparently, there's a leading game theory here that the monster is also attracted to bad feelings, which is why they never told Stephanie when they finally buried Paul. But that's just a theory. Stephanie then wants to know why she was left alone, and she wants the truth this time. The truth? Well, her father was a coward. That's the truth. But he did come back, and it looks like he wants to set things right. Then her dad talks about cultivating inner strength. I mean, she stayed and survived here alone all this time, so this kid's definitely ballin'. Her dad tells her to sink for a rinse, but then she images him drowning her. Whoops, brain fart. It was another head, and everything's fine. Further into the night, Steph eavesdrops on her parents discussing Steph's toughness and survivability. They say that while she might be tough, she might not be able to survive some unnamed medical procedure. Then she goes back to sleep. Of course, this sleep is interrupted by things that go bump in the night, so Steph looks for her parents. And they're gone again. Amazing. Parents of the year, everybody. Steph wanders around in the house, and a door opens up, and then it closes back again. It opens back up again, only to reveal her father turning his head around like an owl. Whoops, another dream. Everything's fine. Right. Time to wander the house yet again, and guess what's outside? Her parents. Of course, the monster still makes some noise, and would you look at that? The monster's invincible, and it drags the dad to the basement. Jane takes her daughter and quickly hides in the upstairs bathroom. The two keep their traps shut until the monster passes. Looks like the coast is clear. Not. The invisible force drags the mother too. So Steph takes Frances and makes the brave attempt to jump from the second floor. She attempts to make a break for it, but it looks like the parents are fine and they try to stop her from crossing the fence. Jane grabs her from the fence and the ground goes haywire. Jane sedates her daughter, and she reveals to her that the monster was Stephanie all along. So it really was all in my head to an extent. The next day, it looks like it was all a dream, and even Paul is alive. But that's a memory too. Apparently, they try to have Steph remember her memories because whatever's infecting her, it's messing up her mind and her actions. So, she remembers the day Paul bit the dust, and she begins to remember the supernatural things she's been doing ever since that day. In fact, she was responsible for Paul's passing and why they left the house. She then awakes, and she looks like she's been possessed by something devious. Fulu, maybe. This was Eric's plan, and it failed, so they sedate her and go with Jane's plan. Basically, a very convoluted medical operation. Whatever they're after, it's at her nape too. What is this? Attack on Titan. Just as they were about to basically lobotomize her, she causes a psychic explosion. Some time comes by, and it looks like Eric is watching the outbreak slowly ravage the world. It also says that euthanasia may be the only cure. Eventually, Steph does wake up and she's taken to a walk with Eric. This walk doesn't look right because they go out of the fence. Outside, Eric explains that only kids are infected with this kind of psychic disease. Looks like their next plan is to Bill Cosby her into submission, but Steve's psychic powers crush the cup. Just as Eric reaches for his piece, Steph controls herself. All is good, right? Nope, the disease fights back. So Eric pulls the trigger repeatedly, like a real American would do. Eric comes back, and it's safe to say the two are in disarray. Hold the tears, because Steph is back with a vengeance. She throws Eric, then she hunts down her own mother. She brings the two together to completely, only to horrendously torture them. After she's done, Steph ravages half the entire home, then brings Franklin and her parents out into the woods. She leads her parents by Paul's grave, and then we begin to really see her Lovecraftian powers manifest. This is only the beginning of the end, because that's it for Stephanie. Starring Shree Crooks, Anna Torv, and Frank Grillo. If you had Stephanie's powers, what's the first thing you'd do? Let us know in the comments below using #CinemaRecap, and we'll see you in the Lovecraftian horror.